Okay.
Hi, welcome to It's So Friday. Today we are making the Lady Elizabeth quilt block. Now this block is super versatile, and while the collection is a little more traditional, you can see here are 3 color stories. This is the first one that has some grays and pinks. The next one is a little brighter with some pinks, light blues, and some goldy kind of yellows and teals. And the third is this really beautiful purple and green and blue mix, and this is what we'll be sewing with today. So as you can see, the collection is a little more traditional, but the great thing about this block that we'll be working on, which is this is the finished product. No sneak peeks. The great thing about this block is that you can just change up the fabric selections and make it much more modern. You could go very neutral for like a baby quilt. And because the blocks are a nice size, they finish at about 12 inches, or they're 12 inches unfinished. You can make just a few and have a pillow. You can make a little bit more and have a small baby quilt. A few more, you have a lap quilt. Pretty soon, I mean, you could keep going. You could have a king quilt. You could have like twice as big as a king quilt just by making more and more blocks. And there's some fun little tricks we're going to be doing, especially in making half square triangles 8 at a time. Now, the tools that you will need for this pattern experience first is going to be the Lady Elizabeth pattern. It's a free download on the Robert Kaufman website, so if you follow the link in our Facebook profile, or if you're on Instagram, we'll be doing a story right afterwards with the link.
It's also in the profile.
Oh, so and it's in our profile.
Yeah, you can go to the actual Robert Kaufman profile, click the link, and go download it.
And remember, you're looking for the Lady Elizabeth pattern. You'll know you have the right pattern when it looks like this one. Okay, next up, tools that you will need. You're going to need a ruler, obviously, for cutting, and your rotary cutter. You will need a marking tool. I'm using a friction pen. It's heat erasable, and don't worry about it getting anywhere on your fabric. It's just going to be on a seam. You're actually going to cut that part, so it's okay. Pins, if you are so inclined. A seam ripper, because every time I don't have a seam ripper live on camera, I make a really great mistake, so it's better to have it. A pair of scissors. We're using some Kai shears, but a little pair of snips would work really well because we're going to be doing chain piecing today. All right, when you pick your fabrics, you start with maybe a collection or a bundle, but for each block, all you need are your 4 fabrics that you decided you wanted to work with. You like how these look together, so you're going to pick these for your block, plus whatever you want to use for your background. In these blocks, if you're working with a more colorful collection, it's great to have more of a neutral backdrop. If you're working with like blacks and whites, you could always do like a really fun pop of color as the background. It's totally up to you. A lot of flexibility with this quilt. Now, I've already done some cutting just to give us a running head start here. But for each block, you're going to need 2 5-inch squares, one of the background, one of the print that will be your little half square triangles. You'll need 4 3.5 by 5-inch rectangles for your sashing, a centerpiece that will be 3.5-inch square, and the rest of the pieces are all going to be 2-inch squares. So it really helps to cut a long 2-inch strip and then subcut down into smaller units. So you'll have 8 of the light squares for your center block, 8 of the dark squares, and 4 of the background. All right, so the first step after you've done your cutting, and if you follow the pattern, it gives you all the cutting directions for the entire quilt all at once. So I just broke that down into what you need for a single block. Okay, so the very first thing that you're going to do is identify your background and your print that you're going to use for the half square triangles. And on the back of this print, take your marking pen and your ruler, and you're going to draw a line point to point like this. So draw that line on the back, and once you've marked that line, you're going to draw another line so you have a big X along the back of this charm square. Now, these are not sewing lines. These are going to be lines that you stitch a 1/4 inch on either side. So my pen is starting to fade, of course. I need to get a new pen. All right. So as you can see, now I have a piece of fabric with a giant X on the back. You're going to put your two 5-inch squares right sides together. If you're a believer in pinning, I'll show you. I'll just show you. I don't believe in pinning, but I'll show you how to make it easier on yourself because this does get a little shifty. I would just tuck a pin on each side. Maybe, I mean, you could do on all the 4 sides, but I'm just going to do on 2 sides. Then what you'll do is 1/4 inch from that drawn line on each side, you're going to stitch. So you'll end up with 1, 2, 3, 4 stitching lines, creating kind of a double X. So we're gonna go right over to our machine and just get to sewing. Now you can, whoa, I forgot to set my seam allowance. Set your seam allowance to 1/4 inch. Don't sew with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. That would be wrong. I'm telling you, seam ripper every time. Okay, now we're really going to go sew 1/4 inch along each side, using that line you drew as your guide. Ow. If you pin, be careful that you don't stab yourself with your pins. That may be why I don't pin, because I forget that they're there and my fingers remind me. So I've just finished my first rows of stitching just on each side of one red line. So now I have a double line and the red line down the middle. I'm going to repeat the process on the other red line. Okay, almost there. Now pin again. Okay, take those pins out, and now you have this double X with the red line right down the center. So what you're going to do next is lay this flat, and without shifting it too much, you're going to cut on the red lines. You'll have cuts like this. Then before you move it, you're also going to cut in a plus. So you'll have kind of like a fancy star of cutting. So let's start with cutting on the red lines. Now this is a lot easier when you're really careful not to shift it. So if it shifts at all, kind of just nudge it back in place. And now you're going to center your ruler between the points on your triangles and cut. And then repeat that going the other direction.
For everyone talking about the blurriness of the video, it's not all blurry. It goes in and out a bit. It's the Wi-Fi that we've been having some trouble with all day. So, our apologies, but hopefully you can still see what's going on. Yay.
And if you can't see what's going on, a really great guide is the pattern. It actually has all the steps that I'm detailing here written out, very easy to read. I don't follow directions that great, and even I can read it. So, all right, once you've cut this up, you have 8 of these little half square triangles. The most important step in this pattern here is the one that you might not read if you were me, and it's possible that I didn't read it and then had to go back and fix my blocks the first time I did this. So you're going to press all your little half square triangles open, and I like to press them all going the same direction. I'm pressing to the dark side, so I'm going to line up all my little blocks over on my ironing station. Remove them all. And you will be repeating the step I just did actually twice, but it's a little more time consuming, so I've already done this once. So you'll do this twice for each block that you'll be making. So it's a really great time where you can get familiar with your 1/4 inch seam allowance and how much fun that is, and how great it is to square up little tiny half square triangles. Super fun. All right, and pressing open all the little things without burning your hands, that's also a fun one. Okay, so we have all of these little half square triangles now, and they look about the same size, but because of the method of construction, they can vary in size. So as I've been squaring up earlier, I found that they are anywhere from 2 inches to like 2 1/8 to 2 1/4, kind of depends. So it's very important at this point that you square up these little blocks so that they are 2 inches square. And the way I do this is I look at my ruler and I look at the point to point on a 2 inch, And then I line up my block so that my points where the fabrics intersect match on that block too. So this is a little bit of a tedious process, but you'll see how much you cut off each block, and you can imagine what kind of crazy seam allowance you would get if you weren't doing this squaring up. Okay, so just from this block alone, you can see that we pulled out probably close to 1/4 inch off of the block. Maybe you can see. If it's blurry, it probably just looks like my hands are kind of over here and All right, so now you're going to repeat that step for every half square triangle that you made. And there's a lot of them, but you kind of get in a groove. If you have a rotating cutting mat, this might be a great time to use it, because then all you would have to do is spin your cutting mat. You wouldn't have to rotate the piece that you're squaring up. Since I don't have a rotating cutting mat, I'm just turning all the pieces. Okay. And if you're, one of the things, if you kind of are against the camp of squaring up, I always like to save all the extra little scraps until the end, because it really makes me feel like my work was valued, and I can see in my patchwork you know, the benefit of doing this. Gives you really sharp, crisp points. It also means that when you go to piece it together later, you don't cut off a big chunk of one block because so much of it was pieced with the second block. I'm sure everyone who hasn't squared up blocks has dealt with the struggle. It took me a long time, but I'm finally on the square up camp. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them here. Yael or Yael will be Yael will be shouting them out to me. I can answer any product questions, or you know, whatever. It's a long, lonely job squaring up quilt blocks.
Again, just apologizing to everyone watching on Facebook that it's not crisp clear today. We're having issues with our Wi-Fi, but hopefully the upload will be a little bit better after the fact.
I have a song from a video game stuck in my head. It's totally normal. We are almost done squaring up, guys. One more block. And then we'll be moving on to the fun part. I guess some people think squaring up is fun. When I square up, I like to use a larger ruler than I need, because it gives me a little bit more pressure on the ruler, so I don't feel like I'm going to cut off my fingers. I also like to keep my hand about like 2 inches away from the edge of my ruler, just in case. Once you've rotary cut yourself once, you're always careful after that. All right, so you can see all the scraps that came off of the little half square triangles, and that worst enemy. So throw that away. And now you're going to line up your little pieces, your little half square triangles you just made, in 2 groups. And I need to look at the picture in the pattern to make sure that I tell you the right thing. This pattern is a considerably large pattern because it shows you all 3 different color stories. Okay, so you'll have 2 groupings. Since this is a bear paw kind of block, it's important that you pay attention to which direction the colors are going. If you piece them all the same, your bear paw, the effect won't work. So, some of them are going this way, some of them are going this way. Okay, I'm going to piece one together real quick so you guys, I can show you what the difference is. And then I'll proceed on with piecing the rest of them. And on these, if you want to go back and forth a little bit at the start of your seam, you can. It never hurts. Okay. So, when you chain piece, your snips are really great because then you don't have to rotary cut in between individual things. Let me just press these open and I'll show you what the heck I'm doing. All right, so you need 2 groupings, 4 like this and 4 like this. So you can see how the blue is going a different direction. And it's important that you make 4 sets of each so that your bear paws will all look like little bear paws. Okay, So I'm going to lay these out as a guide so that I remember what I wanted them to look like. And then I will lay, I was like, I don't have enough pieces, but I do. I like to lay out my pieces in the order they're going to be sewn so that I don't mix them up. Okay. And once you're ready for that, now you can sew them together in a long chain piece. Now,
sorry, someone's requesting to know what the block looked like, and since we haven't showed it since the beginning, I was gonna pull it out. But
the block that we're working on will look like this. And there's a more modern version with using Carolyn Friedlander's new Gleaned collection, which is in stores now. So you can really make it your own, just depending on what fabric you want to use. Okay, so I'm sure most of you are familiar with chain piecing, but if not, chain piecing is just when you have a lot of the same thing to do and you have this in your machine, but you don't cut the seams or cut the threads. Instead, you just stitch a couple extra stitches and then you start sewing the next piece. So when I'm done, they'll be connected by a thin chain of threads. Kind of looks like bunting at that point, but it's really fun. And if you do a lot of chain piecing, you get this really long piece of fabric and thread, and it's just beautiful.
Do you always chain piece?
I chain piece whenever I can. I just think it's convenient, and then there's less risk if you have a machine that, like, if you forget to pull the thread too far and you start sewing and the thread unthreads, chain piecing reduces that risk because it's not going to come unthreaded. It's already attached to something at the end, which is why a lot of people enjoy chain piecing. All right, so here's my little chain of blocks, and now I'm going to press them. And I'm using just a little bit of flatter, which is a spray starch alternative and just helps your seams and your fabric do what you want it to do and lay nice and flat. And I'm using an Oliso iron, which is a smart iron. It has little feet, so when I let go, it stands up on its own and doesn't burn the ironing board. Once you get used to one of these, you forget that not every iron knows how to stand up on its own, and then you burn your ironing board. All right, so now we have a nice chain of open pieces, and we are going to just use our little fabric scissors here and snip those threads between each one. Okay, and now I like to line them up in the family that they went with. So depending on what direction the points are going, keep them in their stacks so they don't get mixed up. Now the next thing we're going to chain piece are these center blocks, and this is really easy because all you need to do for your first step is take a dark and a light and piece them all together. So I have my dark pile and my light pile, and I'm just going to sew them together. Now if you're working with fabric with directionality, you will want to be more mindful of which way things are going so that you don't have motifs going all different directions, but these are both tossed designs, so it doesn't matter which way we go with it, which makes it super easy for this kind of a project. Okay. Now there are quite a few of these, but they go super quick and they're fun. This is a great way to practice chain piecing because there's no extra seam bulk. So with the half square triangles, you do get a little bit of extra bulk in the seams. So you have to, get used to that if you're not already. But this is just two little pieces of fabric, putting them right sides together, lining up the edges and going for it. Easy as pie. Or as quilting. It's totally the same. It's Friday, guys. Does anyone have any fun sewing plans over the weekend? Cancel everything, stay inside, order takeout, or dine in. Not dine in, take out that they bring to your house so you can dine in. All right, so now we have all these blocks, and you'll notice that because I kept the darks and the lights on the same side, all the darks are on one side, the lights are on the other. I'm going to press again. I want to press to the dark side, so I'm going to lay the light sides down and just spray them all with a little bit of flatter, and press them all going the same direction. This is going to be important for these blocks because it means you'll be able to lock your seams, which is a really great way to make sure you get a nice crisp point right in the center of your block. And, okay, so now you have all your little blocks. And we're just going to, again, use our little scissors and snip apart the threads that are holding them together. Be careful that you don't accidentally cut into your block or you'll have to remake it. That happens sometimes. Okay, now you have these two pieces. You're in groups of two. You're gonna just turn this one like this, put them right sides together, and now the seams, since they're both pressed to the dark side, will nest, whoa, struggle in here, will nest right up next to each other and create like a nice clicking connecting point for you. And you're just going to sew these with a 1/4 inch seam allowance.
I don't know what happened on Facebook for all.
That means I can go at normal speed again. I was sewing in slow motion, so all you missed was that I sewed those little 2 patches together into 4 patches, then pressed them open. And again, because the seams were both facing the same direction, it made them lock nicely. So now we have 4 patches, and we have a whole stash of these little blocks. So at this point, what I like to do is I like to lay out the block. You'll notice in the design how this dark blue is the center of each one, and how the bear paw points, the long strip is here and here, so the points kind of make a claw like a fingers. So this is helpful. It's helpful to lay it out so that you don't accidentally piece it away you don't intend. The way that I do that is to lay out the 4 patches on the ground, on my table. Lay out your other pieces, and you'll use from each set. So you have 4 in each set. You'll use 1 in each set on 1 of each side. That's why it's important to keep them separated. And once you have them lined up, you'll have this kind of look of what the bear paw will look like when it's finished. Then you'll take your background little squares and also place them in the same layout here. Okay, now you're ready to sew this all together. So I like to work in 1 segment at a time. I'll take the top row of the first little things and the background, first half square triangle unit, and I'm going to sew that seam. And then I take this unit and sew them together. And your seams may not nest at this point, so if you are a pinner, it's great to pin because it keeps it kind of all in one spot. Now for pressing, I like to press the background piece this way so that the bulk seam isn't being tucked under, and then the opposite on the next portion of the block that I'm working on so that those 2 pieces will nest. Again, it's not necessary. It does make it a little easier though because you'll have less seam bulk since there won't be as many pieces all in one spot. And I don't even snip the connecting thread at this point. I just fold them right sides together and then sew along that seam. Which, that clipping the thread, it's kind of optional. If you need to take it apart later for some reason, that's an extra thread you're going to have to clip. All right, so now we have this, and when you open it up, you can see we have 1 little bear paw. So I'm just going to press this. Give it a spray so that it obeys me. And then I will repeat this process with my other 3 units. And that's the biggest amount of sewing for a construction piece that you'll have to do for this block. Just because it's a lot to keep track of. You want to make sure that you aren't rotating your bear points, that you don't accidentally change the placement of the dark and light squares in the center, as long as you want it to look like the block in the pattern looks. It's kind of up to you. the beauty of quilting. You could decide you want it to look totally different and do whatever you want. Sometimes, if you realize you made a mistake later, you say that that was what you were trying to do anyway. Call it a design element.
For everyone watching on Facebook, we're going to do our best to upload a much clearer version of this after the fact. We apologize for all of the camera issues and the Wi-Fi issues, but it's just something we got to deal with right now.
Alright, so if you're a pinner, it helps to pin at the main seams because it will keep your seam bulk from like flipping on you and making your life a little more difficult. Again, not totally necessary, you can get by without it, but if you like to pin, you should pin. Okay, now we have our second bear paw, yay! And now we're moving on to number 3. And if you're really confident that you have your layout down, you could just sew them all together at once. But sometimes what that means is that when you're opening it up to press, you might have accidentally sewn them on the wrong direction, which is kind of a pain. But I'm going to go for it, because we'll see. So this is working on the 3rd and 4th quadrant. And the way I'm kind of keeping track is I did the first 2 together, and now I'm doing the next 2 together. We'll see how it works out. So now I have my chain piecing. I'm going to cut the first, just the 2 groups separate and press them. So, because of the way that I chain pieced, and I did this earlier so I can tell you why this can be tricky. I chain pieced them out of order from construction. So if I didn't clip and move this and I just sewed this here, my block would be wrong. So I actually have to move this to the other side, and you can see now that looks much better than that. Okay. So lining up my pieces, using my 1/4 inch seam allowance. And again, just pressing, giving it a good press with some flatter so it stays put. Voila, voila, hooray. Okay, same thing again, I need to separate my pieces, otherwise they would be going the wrong direction. Give them a quick press, and then sew. Okay. All right. So once I press this, now I have 4 of these units. Yay. The next thing to do is just to complete this block is going to be to make the plus that's the sashing. So this starts with the center piece, and you're going to take 2 of these 3.5 by 5 strips and sew it to either side of this 3.5 inch square. And this is going to be the cross section of the block. The leftover 3-inch by 5-inch pieces are going to go between the 2 patchwork segments that you just made. So we have this. I'm going to give it a little press and lay it down because it looks so pretty there. And take another background piece and attach it to the bear paw claw. Bear paw claw. Again, sewing with a 1/4 inch. Oh, my thread just broke. Whoops. If your thread breaks, I'm sure you get really used to rethreading your machine. It's true. I love needle threaders. They make your life so much easier. Look at that, already rethreaded. You can tell that I'm used to that. Okay. if you're back to chain piecing, you can attach the leftover piece to the bottom side. Okay, now give these a little press, and you will be attaching the last bit of the bear paw. Okay, again with your scissors, just clip your seams. And now here, you're going to attach the next section of the block. It'll be really exciting, guys. It is. It is. No one needs weekend plans when you have quilt blocks. Those are the weekend plans. Okay. And be careful to match up your lines. Then you sew. So now we just need to press this. Now when I pressed these, I like to press so that the piece of fabric that doesn't have a lot going on here, that these seams stay straight and this piece folds, because it's going to fold a little bit easier. And then on this one, to counter that, whoa, you can see these seams are pressed down, so these seams are pressed up. That means when you go to assemble this, those middle seams will lock in, which is great and is going to make your life easier when you're assembling your final blocks. So if you pin, you can always just pin at those 2 points where the middle block intersects, right there, and then line up your edges and sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Wow, what is going on? Something isn't happy with my bobbin. I just messed up thread twice. I'm just gonna rethread the machine.
Guys, I wasn't showing them your struggles over.
This is real life. This is, you know, this is what sewing is some days. Guessing what your machine wants. Do you want a new bobbin? Do you want a new needle? Do you want me to jump through a hula hoop? What do you want? It's a big question. Pull the bobbin thread up. Maybe that will help. Okay. Now, going to start sewing again. Oh look, much happier. Just wanted me to fix the bobbin. Okay.
For everyone asking about the pattern, if you would like to download it, it's available for free on our website, and there is a link in our Instagram profile as well. Well, now that we've restarted the Facebook broadcast, it'll be in the new video that we post after this, so you can grab it there.
So, now that that seam is connected, I'm just going to give it a little press.
Now our Instagram has paused you. Okay, we're back.
And I'm going to sew the last piece to this block. This time I'm not going to pin, just to show you you can do it without pinning, you know. And because I don't like pinning. I forget, I stabbed myself, it's not fun. Okay. If you are not pinning, I find it helpful just to pause a quick second before you get to those corners where they're going to overlap, so that you can kind of adjust it a bit, make sure it's going to fit quite right. But you can see that this is going smoothly and went really nicely without any pins. Good job, Luck. You did it. Okay. Giving it one final press. You can see it in all its glory. And just like that, you've made your block from Lady Elizabeth. So it's pretty quick and easy. You've learned some new tricks with cutting for the 8 at a time half square triangles. The best thing I can recommend is to read that pattern, because the first time I made them, I said, huh, I did something wrong. But then I read the pattern, made a lot more sense. And again, you can do these with a bunch of different kinds of fabrics and styles. So this is gleaned by Carolyn Friedlander, shipping to stores now and in stores now. And this is Lady Elizabeth, also shipping to stores now. So check it out, check out the pattern, and
We have a few questions.
Oh,
just
okay.
last minute.
Questions.
What foot number are you using?
This foot is the A foot for the Janome 8900. It's kind of like the standard do-it-all foot. Lets you do zigzag, straight stitch.
And what is the spray called that you're using?
This is Flatter by Soak Wash. It's a spray starch alternative. It comes in 4 lovely scents, and it's scentless also. So if you are sensitive to scents, I would get scentless.
And your iron, can you tell?
This is an Oliso Smart Iron. It has little feet, so it picks itself up when I stop touching it, and as soon as I touch it, drops back to the iron. It's great if you have arthritis or issues with the weight of a heavy iron. And yeah.
All right. So for everyone who's been watching on Facebook, just stay tuned. We're gonna try and repost something that's higher quality in a little bit. Everyone on Instagram, thanks so much.
Have a great day, and we'll see you in a few Fridays.
Woo.